Hey everyone, and welcome to the second session of Mission Possible, focused on managing costs and increasing runway. Bianca Lopes remains as our moderator for this session, and this time she'll be joined by Diane Janknecht, the founder of Wisenose, Hans van Houwelingen, the founder and managing partner of Urban Impact Ventures, and Karina Bellin, the co-founder and CEO of WHub. Again, please do keep asking questions using the chat function or by raising your hand using the button at the bottom of your screens. Back over to you, Bianca.
Thank you so much, Tom. Well, welcome panelists and welcome everybody who's joining. We have a lot of people attending this session, which makes me super excited to share with entrepreneurs. One of the tough conversations to have. So Hans, Karina, and Diane have a tough conversation to talk about, something most entrepreneurs go like this about, especially when we're driven by purpose. Costs is not something we usually like talking about. We've all been hit by the crisis in many different ways, shapes, and forms. We have over 75 people, 75 countries represented here today. So I'm sure everybody's feeling a little bit different version of the blues. So I wanted to start by asking sort of what have been your priorities, Hans, when you're looking at being an entrepreneur, managing costs through this crisis? Like, how have you really looked at this? How have you readdressed it? What are some of the things that maybe perhaps are obvious to people like office? How have you managed all of this?
Well, I think the blues of cost, everybody will have to listen to it going forward. It's unavoidable, both for people investing entrepreneurs like I do, but also the entrepreneurs themselves. And I think the first piece of advice I would like to share with everybody is that if you have external investors, maybe in the last 12 years, since maybe the crisis in 08, 07, you didn't had to listen to them, but maybe this is the moment where you might tap into their experience, because many investors actually are lived through some crises before, and many entrepreneurs during the last 12 years actually didn't really have to focus on costs or on getting capital or even bother about the word runway, because capital was more or less affluent if you had a good proposal, whether it was a social business or a pure capitalistic business in that sense. I don't want to hijack anything for the next group of people after us, but what we see is that investors are choosing or are focusing on their existing portfolios, and it's very simple. They either go full throttle on the business or they put a huge brake on the business. So it's getting black and white. If you're not a very prosperous business or a business that is really delivering on its promised social impact, you get into a nasty environment, and there aren't so many options available at this moment in time. I think what everybody should do at this point in time, because before we go into depth, is it starts with looking at the capital you have and the capital you need and what you can do in order to reduce it. And that's runway. How long can you do with the capital you have? And I think the numbers we saw recently from some studies from startup Genome, for example, around 65% of businesses that at least a single A round have a runway of less than 6 months and 40% less than 3 months. So it's a big topic that we're going to touch with the four of us.
Oh my goodness, Hans, I think I didn't know that number. The number is scarier than it sounds. Karina, over to you to share a little bit about sort of what, as the co-founder and CEO of HUB, like WHub, what have you been seeing in your startups? Like, we have Hans as a prospective investor. What have you been seeing on that side, on sort of the cost frenzy of what do I do? The crisis has hit. Maybe I'm not product ready. Maybe I thought I was going the right direction. What are some of the insights you could share with our
Sure. Actually, I got to answer actually from a founder's perspective. Yes, with WHub, indeed, we're in the center of the Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area startup ecosystem. But I'm actually also the co-founder and responsible officer of Angel Hub, which is Hong Kong's very first and still only SFC regulated startup investment platform. So equity crowdfunding, and we have our own fund. So I really look at it from both sides, and I think actually just to build a little bit on what Hans said, I think obviously a crisis really crystallizes one thing that you look at as a founder or even as an investor, particularly the earlier the stage of the company you're looking into, which is the agility of the team, right? And agility comes obviously in seizing top line opportunities. And again, it also depends on which sector you are. I mean, for some, the crisis is a blessing in disguise, right? The KPIs go through the roof, but definitely, and that is a bit the topic here, right? Also in terms of cost cutting, right? How quickly you can really understand, that cash is king. I mean, to Hans's point, right? And obviously having the right investors and the right advisors around you is definitely something that is very important. I think one of the tips is, you always go in terms of financial planning, and I did this before in my corporate career, you always have best case and worst case scenarios. I think the overriding tip is, you do your best case and worst case scenario, you look at your worst case scenario, and you ask yourself the question, what if this would be the best case scenario? So I think, you never can underestimate how low can go. That's for sure one thing. Now, the really tricky thing is, and again, particularly the earlier stage the company is, 80% of the cost structure of your companies are people, right? I mean, that's the advantage of a tech business. You don't have a lot of CapEx, right? You don't have a lot of other costs. Marketing costs or whatsoever arguably are ideally low as well, because you know how to growth hack, everything into your advantage without spending the big marketing dollars. So you are actually in this situation where you do have to face very often, as founders that, okay, 80% of my costs are the people, and I need the people to build the business. So again, I think that is something we're then again trying to understand, how bad can bad go? How do you understand that, in this cash is king, you may have other opportunities to bridge. A lot of people are calling in, I think from Europe or from the Western world. I'm not so sure again how active, governments are in certain areas. I think here that's an advice as well, where I encourage, certain governments and certain also, regions do actually understand that, particularly in such, crisis, SMEs and then obviously startups, the tech version of the SMEs are really, in need of substantial support. So I think just that as an ingoing tip and as an ingoing, again, just face the reality for sure. I think you're on mute, Bianca.
Yes, I am. One of the hard things that we think about is no one planned for this. I think when we look at the scenario A, scenario B, bad scenario, good scenario, nobody really planned for a pandemic, and nobody really, I think there's a looming feeling, I think it's society today, about when is it going to end? Is it going to spike again? So I think it's interesting that we here have a little bit of like, I'm in Brazil, you have another perspective, we have Hans over there. So Diane, I'm going to bring you onto the conversation here so you can share a little bit about what have you been doing and what is some of the advice that you have for people when they're thinking about managing costs on this thing that they might have great scenarios, but they probably didn't fully plan for this, because I don't know who would have planned for a pandemic other than Bill Gates. Diane?
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm muted, right? I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So no, nobody, definitely nobody planned, and certainly I didn't. So hi everybody. I'm Diane. I'm the founder of Wise Knows, and we're we're located in the Netherlands, and we're scaling right now. And before COVID, I really had big plans of opening a few subsidiaries, and then everything stopped, of course. So the first thing I did, and I think among me, all entrepreneurs or all founders, was did a deep dive into your cash flow, right? I think as a founder, you really have to know every dollar, euro, whatever currency you're working with that goes out. And I don't think you can ask your team to do that. You have to have ownership. And like Karina says, 80% is people, and the biggest goal you have is to keep your people on board. So after that, when you have found out, like Hans is saying, okay, is it between 3 or 6 months that you are, right? Because that's reality. You can start to decrease costs without getting rid of your team, because again, that was my highest goal. And luckily, in both in the Netherlands and the UK, where we have offices, the government was really willing to talk to you. And the easiest thing to do was to defer some of your payments, right? Like VATs and wages. That was, well, in my situation, relatively easy. I also had a few loans that I had to repay. So that was also pretty easy to get that deferred. It's just a deferment, right? You won't get. But for me, what really helped me, which might be a tip for some of the listeners, because that's still very actual. I'm in the software as a service business. So for me, my costs to the cloud are, next to my people, by far my highest cost. So I've called the big IT suppliers, all of them, and I said, listen, we can do two things. Either I'm going to reduce everything, or you help me get through this, give me a credit, not deferred payment, right? Give me a gift, and let's see if we can target maybe a few customers and do them together. So you take care of my cloud costs, and then I can continue my conversation. That has been a real success, So I
really, they've been open to it, even though sort of, I think a lot of entrepreneurs out there might be feeling a little bit scared to say, I'm going to approach the big guy. Am I important enough? What has been sort of a success formula other than your sales capacity?
Exactly. So first of all, do it yourself, right? They want to talk to the founder because they want to understand your plan. And so don't ask either if you have a financial person or I don't know who in your team. You have to be there and you have to show your commitments towards those IT suppliers. And of course you have to do your numbers, right? Look at the past. What did you do? What can you do in the future if your plans are there? And then tell them, because they understand, right? Tell them that right now this is the blocking part of growing together, and yeah, so ask for it. That's my main suggestion. If you don't ask, they can't give it, right? And everybody has said yes to me.
Definitely won't be able to give you.
Well, so ask for it. Ask for a grant, or credits, or and not those strange credits that will apply in 12 months' time. You don't need that, right? If they suggest that, tell them, listen, I'm not interested. I need it right now, and I want it on my account or reduced from my account as of next week. And so I'm an ex-Microsoft, so maybe that was a little bit, but I got my credits from AWS, Amazon. So it's just play the game. That's so if people want to approach me how to do it, feel free to approach me, but you as the founder have to do it and ask for it. They are very, very open for it.
That's amazing advice, Diane. You might have a bunch of people reaching out to you to ask you coaching lessons to negotiate
but the people that are on this call are all here for a mission possible, right? So I'm definitely here to support, because I think COVID overall is a huge opportunity for companies that are doing good. I really think there's going to be a difference in that. So if those entrepreneurs are on the line, I'm here to help you.
I couldn't agree more. In terms of, let's change gears, is there any, you've all talked about sort of reevaluating, looking inwards and having a perspective of perhaps doing something you should always do as an entrepreneur, which is managing your cash quite tightly and being the one personally involved. Is there any platforms, tools, or systems you have used that might help entrepreneurs of even just a framework of how you thought about this, perhaps on some of your ventures, or anybody who wants to sort of share? We've had some questions about what are platforms or what are ways and frameworks that you've utilized to do this and to make sure that you're sort of optimizing to the best degree possible.
Well, to build on Diane, I think, looking for partners, I think is a good advice always. I think what I see too much also with our portfolio companies is that, especially on the side of technology, many startups are inventing the wheel twice. And I think that's also because there might have been too much cash available for for lots of the same in the last couple of years. Going forward, that's a little bit harder. I think everybody having its own development team, that's a serious cost. And whether you look at fintech or at at health tech on the administrative side, I see many things being developed that are almost the same. So I think partnering up, reaching out, asking your suppliers maybe for a partnership or for help is an excellent piece of advice. I don't have here a list of platforms to share with you, but what I would like to take from my previous life, I spent a lot of my career in, let's say, more the established corporate world, where we would have people chasing clients and people doing tech, but there was also a very large part of the organization looking at risks and scenarios and all these things that startups didn't have to look at. And it's not that we were so heavy on tools or platforms, it's what just, taking some time, stepping a little bit back with the team and say, what's the worst that could happen to us? Very basic reviews of bad things with a certain frequency that it might happen. Startups don't have to go very deep on, very advanced risk modeling, but at least, it's a reality today. What is happening to your business in the next 6 months, but also what if it takes 12 months or it never even fades out? So, start to look at a variety of horizons and have a good conversation, and maybe invite a devil's advocate, or maybe invite an advisor or even an investor to guide you through, but just sit together and draw these scenarios. You don't need a tool for that. And that can translate back in what does it mean for finance and what does it mean for business. And that's two things, because in the short term, we're all focused on finance and runway, but in the long term, especially as an investor, I will also look at whether your business is still viable due to maybe the new normal that we will encounter.
I couldn't agree more, Hans, in terms of actively sort of searching and having the humility of ask for help. What have you seen or what have you done as an investor when you look at your portfolio companies to actively play a role in that conversation? And then I want your perspective as well, Karina.
That's for me again, or Karina?
Yeah, for you. What have you done as an investor actively to sort of help out in this crisis of them having to sort of remodel their entire go-to-market strategy as well as managing their costs and people?
Well, we try to bring a broader leadership skill to the table, which goes beyond chasing customers and growth and goes beyond the tech. So it's a broader skill set, including a kind of risk management or what have you, but also operational resilience, supply chain management. These topics we actively put on the table and say, we know it works. We know in the back end, you've more or less connected it with some pieces of rope or paper, and on the front end it looks fantastic. But have a look at it again and decide whether that's the way you want to move on. So make sure that the back end is in order as well, and not only the front end. The second thing is that we look at customer acquisition cost for all our businesses, which is very often also a sizable cost. If our portfolio companies are able, we advise them to focus on their existing customers and focus on cross-selling or what have you, and maybe reduce a little bit, the acquisition of new customers. But of course, it depends also a little bit on the phase that you're in. And we try to challenge them to review their metrics. All our companies have to have metrics. It's not something I typically encounter in the very early stage, but if they want to be in business with us, they have to have some core metrics, whether it's social impact related or revenue related or anything that is really relevant for their business. And now we ask them to review, what are actually the metrics that would trigger you to change or pivot your business model? And are these metrics in your dashboard? So it's on a variety of things that we talk about with our teams. We're not going to sit on their chair though. They have to do it themselves.
That's fair. I think ownership is a big theme. Otherwise, why we're starting businesses and being entrepreneurs is because we care, right? We want to take ownership. Karina shared a little bit of your ecosystem sort of view on this as you've looked inwards? How has your approach changed, or what approaches have you seen change in this period?
Yeah, it's actually great that you, again, put it into perspective of the total ecosystem. I always feel like in general, it's very difficult, to talk about sector agnostic, stage agnostic, right? Because obviously it really depends very often, on also, the technology, the sector you're in and the stage you're in. But again, just a little bit the question about tools. And before I was, working for over 15 years in a large corporate where, again, obviously, you have fancy tools in terms of, sensitivity analysis, and you try to understand and 100,000 of scenario plans. But I think, again, and once again, the earlier stage you go, we said it already, cash is king for sure. And I think with that really understanding, and once again, I would really encourage to do risk adjusted, cash flow management. Again, with that, never overestimate the future, or in other words, underestimate how low can go. And I think what is really difficult, and that's linking a little bit into my other point, more important actually than the tools itself, is really then with that the mindset on how you look and how honest you are, and how much are you able actually to bring certainty back in this uncertain situation. So again, if we look into having 80% of your cost structure being salaries, right, instead of putting 100% of your team at risk, because you may be looking into the future in a too positive way, in trying to understand, okay, what are certain elements of your business that you have to put on ice because you're right now more bridging, you might now right now more conserving costs before, again, you're in growth mode, and before you can really raise growth capital and maybe spend a little bit ahead, before you're, and that is really tough. Again, it's really tough, obviously, because it does have consequences on people. But again, if it's overall in understanding how much you can bring certainty back in this uncertain world, because you have a total risk adjusted cash flow management, I think that is the most important part to look at. I think the other thing that we talked about with that is really the assessment of KPIs, right? Of course, it's super important to look at metrics, and even in such uncertain times, to really understand which are vanity metrics and which are metrics that really translate in the nearest future possible into cash. But I think with that is in these very interesting times where thanks to what we're living through, technology is playing a role in changing behavior, is also really understanding what are behavioral changes that are here to stay and what are behavioral changes that are maybe just opportunistic right now. And once again, that's actually very, very interesting, because if we look into, certain areas like the gaming sector, where we're very pragmatically looking into now, from the community builder, but also from an investor side of view, where, one of our, good partners says, right now in the gaming sector, every day is a Sunday. It's fantastic. Everybody is, sitting behind their computers, and, the barriers on getting access, great. It doesn't mean necessarily yet that the monetization follows as fast. But again, some of these behavioral changes are here to stay, and they will translate, and they will translate then also into anything that is connected to financial services, etc. But I think one more point that I really wanted to highlight, because you also asked, from a community perspective, what are some of the tips, or what we also, as not only a community builder, but also as an investor, look into, is in these times where fundraising is maybe not the best idea for a big part of companies, is really how can we drive further opportunities for client acquisition on driving, through WHub, we organize co-innovation programs with corporates who are also under struggle, who also understood, you all know that joke, the person inside your company that is leading the technology innovation is actually not your CIO, it's COVID. They're also craving for innovation, and seeing how can you really ensure that you enable these co-innovation programs that allow startups to monetize rather than to fundraise at this point in time. And on the other hand, on the same side, also some other stakeholders help benefit from the innovative power that, of being part of this ecosystem can give them.
I love your points about sort of looking at how that leads path, like we had in the first discussion about how in order to make change, we require collaboration. And I think one of the things that we've seen in this industry is that when the impact and the complexity of the problem is as big as COVID, it requires you not thinking you could do it alone. And that could mean a different path for your business. Diane,
Absolutely. And I think one of the things, I love what Diane mentioned, just to build on in terms of, just go and ask, right? So again, right now, we're actually also in the midst of organizing our big conference. And, we approached some of these bigger corporates and said, well, there's some of the big corporates that are also cutting down budgets. Some other understand that now is the time to spend. And for example, Hack.Asia right now is really, one big conglomerate saying, I'm out there, I'm providing opportunities for POC, I'm providing cash prize for startups that right now are maybe really looking for an opportunity to innovate in a different area. So I think, I love that, Diane, so go out and ask, right? So maybe 50% of people are gonna say no, but you don't need 100%
I think that means
yes.
you have to be ready, right? I think you sign up for that as being a human and definitely as an entrepreneur to get a lot of doors slammed in your face and a lot of no's. You got to have that resilience. Diane, tell us a little bit about how are you looking? I like to point that both Hans and Karina brought up before about behavior change. I think one of the hardest things that I think personally as an entrepreneur myself is it's a lot of sort of self-awareness has kicked in order not to fall into some mental health struggles around this crisis. I think it's you're having to already be in a normal situation of a startup, which we all know is stressful. Cash is stressful. Something that most entrepreneurs that sometimes are passionate about a particular thing are not necessarily enthralled with having to deal with the finances and other stuff. How have you managed this change, internally? How have you been able to sort of at a very proactive way look at the behavioral changes that are going to impact your SaaS business, that are going to impact your revenue in the short term, as Hans mentioned, but also in the long run, with also dealing with the behavioral changes of your people? Because as we all talked about, this is a cost, and a cost that in a time of crisis, I can certainly talk for myself, investing in my people and having them kind of go a little loopy when they need to produce, and you're like, you have no idea how hard I am holding on for you to have a job. How have you managed it? And what is some advice you maybe have for the entrepreneur sitting there being like, this is all great, but I'm freaking out over here?
Yeah, I can totally understand that and rely. And so I had my moments as well, of course, in the beginning. But my entire team, well, it seems like they all have kids, and all the kids could not be entertained, right? And so I'm in the education business, so I was surprised that nobody could work anymore because all the kids were there. And I love kids, but at a certain moment, it was a bit of a challenge to cope with the lack of productivity, right? But well, it's a philosophy thing. I truly believe if you start to focus on the negative things, you will spend too much time on that. So of course I did understand that it was a challenge for people to cope with it, and it was a challenge as an entrepreneur to deal with it. But if you start to look at the opportunities a crisis can bring, everything turns around. So I told my team, listen, of course, I mean, all schools were closed, 1.5 billion students were at home learning. So you can take a look at that, like that's a huge risk, or turn it around and look at it as a huge opportunity. And so I tried to explain to my team how I thought this was one of the best opportunities that was out there. And then I really told myself, I don't want to be surrounded with people that think negative, because all the negativity it can affect you, right? And so of course I needed to do a fundraise, right? Everybody, I mean, it wasn't like a situation like, oh, I have no challenges whatsoever. But to bring the good news, in this crisis, I doubled my round. So if people are telling you investors are not willing to invest, don't even listen to it. Sorry, Hans, I'm not saying that you said that, but I'm just saying it from my perspective. There are always people that see opportunities in a crisis. So now in a crisis, it's really an opportunity to show your real being an entrepreneur, your core assets, which is think in opportunities, think in possibilities, think in doing things different. Don't stick to doing exactly the same thing with the same cost, with everything the same, but turn it around. And I think right now, I really mean what I say. It's, if you have a proposition that has a purpose and a profit, you're in a good area, because people like to think in good things, especially now that a crisis is going on, even if it has nothing to do with it. We like to think in, oh, let's make the world a bit better, right? It's a challenging time. So if you have a purpose and a profit, emphasize the purpose. Emphasize the purpose a bit more than the profit right now, because the profit might be a little bit of a challenge. But look at it from a longer view, long time view, and think big. Stop telling yourself, oh, now it's a crisis, now nobody will invest, now nobody will pay, now nobody will look for jobs or whatever. Yeah, well, that's my advice, right? Do with it whatever you want, because there are so many ways to run a business. But for me, it's helping to really think in opportunities and ignore all the negative advices that are out there, because it can ruin your business, especially in a crisis.
And I think you just answered Flasia's question. She was asking us, what is the key motivation for pushing during this disruptive time? So I think one of the key ones that I took away from you, Diane, is positivity, is facing it for what it is. And I think asking it and acknowledging the fact that there is a problem, there is a revenue strike, but really sort of allowing that energy, as hairy-fairy and hippie as that might sound, to sort of perpetuate you forward, right?
Yeah,
to associate you with good things.
But you need to be realistic, right? So if your team is really suffering, I have people in South Africa who really had a very challenging time. You can't be all the time happy. Oh, look at me being happy, right? That's not what I mean. Then you really have to listen and understand what they are dealing with. But you can go along with them in really emphasizing how horrible it is, or listen and then try to turn that around in, okay, how can we help? What can we do for you? How can we make this a better situation for you?
Hans, I'm going to turn it over to you. How have you been keeping the positivity? As an investor, is it tough ask sometimes with having those conversations about you have 3 months and you're done? How have you what is some of the positive impact and hopeful things that you've even observed in your own behavior or in your own firm of how you're handling these startups going through this disruptive, difficult time?
Yeah, well, I fully agree with Diane. I mean, if you have the combination of a regular business and on top of that a purpose, this is the right moment. I mean, the amount of money available for those kind of investments is really growing by the day, and it might even accelerate now fast across the globe. It used to be a little bit a European play with Asia catching up, but I think now it's also in the Americas is going big. So in that sense, we are going to have a new normal in terms of what are the businesses that are fancied by investors. And we even see investors embracing words like impact and sustainable and what have you. It comes with a lot of shades of green or whatever color you want to put on top of it. But in the end, it's not relevant what the shade of green is. It's all going in the proper direction. So I think every entrepreneur that is trying to combine these two things, should be able, with a good plan, to find new investors. If I look at my own companies also, of course we look at cost. That was the key topic of this group of people. But we also tell our entrepreneurs, don't overdo it and don't do it too blunt. Of course, if you have no cash, if you run out of cash, you don't have to worry about your team. But in cutting costs, put your team central. If you use your biggest talent because he is having a newspaper, a subscription paid by the firm, which generally speaking I'm against, don't chase him away for the bloody subscription on the newspaper. I mean, it's not the moment you use your talents. The strongest talents you have, you should keep close to get through this period. But generally speaking, I'm against, but don't be too blunt. Keep these people kind of happy while they're sometimes already grumpy for all the reasons just mentioned.
Well, I wanted to take, we're about wrapping up, and I think that I wanted to thank Hans, Karina, and Diane, and say that obviously everybody in the session will be able to find them on LinkedIn, reach out to them, understand how Karina is running hackathons and trying to help entrepreneurs. I had prizes on that list. So if you're looking and talking about cash, I think that that's definitely an opportunity. And I think the most important takeaway, at least for me, is that I hate the word, the new norm, but the new normal is definitely what the world should always be, which is impact, consciousness, sustainability, and also profitability, because we all know that that's what we need for the world to go around. So I thank you all, and I turn it back to Tom for having us. And let's all stay connected in this mission possible.